And good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today is July the 6th, the 187th, 187th day of the year. Just 178 days of this year's over with, and we'll be starting a new one. It falls in the peak of the summer season. Today, celebrated in the U.S., is National Fried Chicken Day, an occasion that encourages enjoying the popular poultry dish. It's also recognized as International Kissing Day. So, if you have your chicken, smooch it. All right, let's see what stories we have in the news, because there's always something going on. The country just celebrated its 250th birthday. Now, I have to say, based on 4th of July as it took place when I was much younger, at least here, this wasn't much. Well, Belgium makes a move after the USA World Cup star's red card suspension was lifted. Belgium Soccer Federation Monday was reportedly given the right to appeal FIFA's decision to suspend the red card ban it gave USA World Cup star Florian Balogun. Royal Belgian Football Association requested a full explanation from FIFA over its decision to suspend USA World Cup star Florian Balogun's red card ban. That's according to the Atlantic. The Royal Belgian Football Association is also requesting a report from FIFA's officiating body. Now, the USA and Belgium started their round of 16 game in Seattle at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. FIFA made its decision to lift the suspension on Balogun on Sunday. It appeared to be the first time since 1962. A red card during a World Cup didn't result in a suspension. Logan initially received the red card for stepping on the ankle of Bosnia and Herzegovina defender Turek Milanovic after a VAR review. The Royal Belgian Football Association said it was astonished, and Belgium coach Rudy Garcia mocked FIFA's ruling. He said, "I didn't know that in the offices of FIFA, the 5th of July was the 1st of April in Europe," he said to a translator. Belgian Federation does not defend itself. It doesn't protect the national team. She defends football in general. She defends her integrity, her ethics. I think it's the first time in the history of the World Cup that there's this kind of decision. Well, we'll see what comes of it. Well, politicians are blaming the wrong villain for America's rising food prices. When food prices rise, politicians and activists instinctively look for a villain to blame. And amid current instability, a lot would be tempted to settle on domestic manufacturers as the scapegoat for skyrocketing prices. Narrative might be politically convenient for some, but it gets the economics of global supply chains exactly backward. The real reason the price of key inputs in American food supply, like fertilizer, is rising is not corporate greed or mismanagement. It's a combination of global disruptions, geopolitical instability, and misguided government policies, both here and abroad. All these factors have come together to make it harder to produce the inputs on which American agriculture relies. Fertilizer, for example, is one of the most important building blocks of the global food supply. Without it, crop yields fail and fall. When crop yields fall, food production declines, causing grocery bills to rise. Fertilizer doesn't appear out of thin air. It relies on a complex combination of materials such as sulfur and ammonia and phosphate rock. And these raw materials are sourced from all corners of the world and rely on international transportation networks. And many of these supply chains are currently under significant stress. A lot of them go through the Strait of Hormuz. which of course is currently something of a war zone. Well, the accused Charlie Kirk assassin Tyler Robinson fights back as and my screen just blanked out. As prosecutors' Smalling case comes into focus. Story's headline: Provo, Utah. Tyler Robinson, a 23-year-old man accused of assassinating Turning Point USA founder Charlie Kirk at Utah Valley University last year, is due in court Monday, that's today, for a week-long preliminary hearing to determine whether prosecutors have enough evidence to move the case toward trial. In many cases, prosecutors secure a grand jury indictment behind closed doors without giving defense lawyers a chance to challenge the evidence. Robinson was charged by information, meaning prosecutors have to establish probable cause for the public preliminary hearing before the case can move to a trial. The defense attorneys will be able to cross-examine witnesses, but unlike an actual trial, there's a lower burden of proof. Prosecutors need to show probable cause for the charges against Robinson. Don't have to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. That comes at trial in front of an actual jury. Kirk, a 31-year-old father of two, was speaking at Turning Point USA event in front of thousands of young people, and a sniper's bullet struck him in the neck. His Woodland parents are expected to attend the hearing. And prosecutors have alleged that investigators found Robinson's DNA on the trigger of the suspected murder weapon, his grandfather's Mauser rifle. A towel they found wrapped around it, 3 of the 4 bullets inside, and a screwdriver recovered near the suspected rooftop sniper's perch. Digital evidence against Robinson is expected to include alleged confessions over text messages and the Discord communications app. Well, all this time and he still ain't gone to trial yet. New York City health officials warn Central Park visitors after Legionnaire's outbreak shows up on the Upper East Side. Legionnaire's disease outbreak on Manhattan's Upper East Side has grown to 14 confirmed cases, according to New York City health officials. Cases are tied to zip codes 10028, 10128, and 10075, covering parts of the Upper East Side, including Yorkville and Carnegie Hill. At least one patient lives, works, or recently visited the 10075 area, according to health officials. Officials are urging anyone who spent time along the east side of Central Park between East 76th Street and East 97th Street to watch for flu-like symptoms, including fever, cough, chills, and muscle aches. Well, since, one point that nobody wants to talk about, Legionnaire's is a communicable disease, and since Mandami has turned New York City into a sanctuary basin, who knows what diseases will be popping up. But Rob Reiner's final role draws a lot of criticism 6 months after the director's tragic death. Rob Reiner's final on-screen appearance in Larry David's latest HBO comedy provoked online criticism. Once vocal critic of the current administration, the late director's surprise cameo in Life, Larry in the Pursuit of Unhappiness, an almost history of America, was considered Reiner's last laugh against President Trump, according to director Jeff Schaefer. It's coming out on the 4th of July weekend, and if it in any way spoils a sad octogenarian's weekend, then oh well, he said during an interview. Social media users quickly criticized the posthumous cameo and its political framing 6 months after Rob and wife Michelle Reiner were found dead inside their Brentwood home. The one user wrote, pretty sure Reiner would have preferred to be alive instead of getting the last laugh. I'm going to go ahead and say that definitely didn't get the last laugh. Well, murdered by his own children or child. That certainly is not the last laugh in anybody's book. Well, let's see what else we've got in the way of news stories. Well, a German World Cup fan breaks down in tears after being blown away by the kindness of Americans. A German soccer fan came to the U.S. for the World Cup, worried he might find the dangerous, crime-riddled country he'd heard about on the news. Instead, he found a place so magical he broke down crying on local television. During an interview with NBC 10 Boston, Sebastian Krause became visibly emotional while explaining how deeply moved he was by the kindness he experienced from Americans during the visit. Germany's World Cup run came to an abrupt end in the round of 32 after a 43 penalty shootout loss to Paraguay. Tough way to go out, but apparently not even a crushing soccer loss could compete with the power of American hospitality. In a news segment, reporter Oscar Bergain said Krause never imagined his trip to America would be so emotional. Video shows Krause wiping tears from his eyes, turning away from the camera, and using his Germany jersey to dry his face as he tried to explain what the trip meant to him. He said, "I fell in love with this country, and this was so emotional, I even cried in the stadium." That's not exactly the reaction the rest of the world is often told to expect when visiting the U.S. Krause admitted he'd been nervous about the trip because of what he'd heard about America from news coverage overseas. Yes, we're painted as the great Satan. If you come here, it's not exactly that. Well, Paige Spironic insists great cans aren't AI after the 4th of July post called into question. When the 4th of July rolls around, you can count on Paige Spironic to deliver, whether it's showing hot dogs, who's boss, or slipping into patriotic swimwear of various styles. She's there. This year, she kept the tradition going, and it shouldn't surprise anybody. Built an entire social media brand on her consistency, her authenticity, and her creativity. Her Happy 4th of July message arrived as expected Saturday afternoon. What expected is that the image's authenticity be called into question. That transpired shortly after she posted it. Doubt crept into the mind of at least one person who called the golf influencer out for using AI. The image included in the 4th of July post features her wearing a patriotic bikini while standing in front of a backyard that isn't real. Well, it's getting to the point. It's hard to tell what's real and what's not when dealing with AI. But there's a lot of classes out there that teach you how to use it and use it well. Well, World Cup comes between a professional soccer couple. She loses and he gets kicked out of bed. There was a lot riding on the Portugal-Croatia match last week. The chance to advance to the round of 16 in the World Cup was on the line. But for one professional soccer couple, the bed was also on the line. And depending on which team won, a one-way ticket to the couch was going to be issued. Croatian soccer player Ana Maria Markovic posted on Instagram, "Somebody sleeping on the couch tonight." Announcement included pictures of her and her Portuguese soccer player boyfriend, Tomas Ribeiro. He responded to the post he was tagged in. Guess who that's going to be? The couple put on their opposing jerseys and headed out to watch the game. And for a second, it appeared that Ribeiro was in a no-win situation from the start. If his team loses, they're out. If his team wins, he ends up kicked out of the couple's bed and can't even celebrate advancing to the next round from the comfort of his own bed. To make matters worse, Markovic, once dubbed the world's most beautiful soccer player, checked in during the game surrounded by fans rooting for Portugal. Well, as we were moving about yesterday, it was amazing how many folks were wearing soccer jerseys. Absolutely unbelievable. Whoever was selling them had to have made a killing this past weekend. Man accused of mowing down two girls in an alleged double murder exposes a twisted reason he kept streaming. New Jersey man accused of killing two teen girls laughed off his critics in a live stream one day after he allegedly killed him, boasting about the engagement he was getting. Maria Neotis and Isabella Salas, both 17, were riding electric bikes on September 29, 2025 in Cranford, New Jersey, when now 18-year-old Vincent Benaloro deliberately struck him with his vehicle, according to prosecutors. Charged with murder as an adult on Friday, June the 26th. Just one day after he allegedly killed the two 17-year-olds, he got on YouTube video game live stream and boasted about the engagement he was getting from people commenting on the killings. The more you guys engage in the chat, the more you give me engagement and I get paid for on YouTube. Just letting you know, that's fine. Y'all just giving me engagement, that's fine. I'm not doing anything until people stop messaging negativity. After people watching the stream continually commented about the deaths of Neotis and Salas, he eventually got fed up and addressed the situation. He said, "There's been a lot of misinformation going on over the internet, but I'll say this. Wish my sincerest condolences to those two girls lost in that tragic accident. Absolutely unfortunate situation. There's more to the story you're not getting. When the time comes, I'll explain it in greater detail. Not authorized to talk about the whole thing right now." Police said his own dash cam showed him getting inside a Jeep Compass on September 29, 2025, driving to the area of Burnside Avenue in Cranford near the home of one of the victims. After he parked, according to the police, both teen girls were seen on electric bikes heading in the opposite direction. Suspect then made a U-turn to follow him while he accelerated the Jeep, according to detectives. They said the video showed both girls being struck at a high rate of speed before the vehicle ultimately stopped. And then he fled the scene on foot. Well, he couldn't have sealed his fate better if he'd gone on national TV and confessed. Well, a toddler that was declared dead after a near drowning is found alive in the hospital morgue hours later, according to police. Arizona police have recommended felony child abuse charges against the parents of an 18-month-old boy. Investigators say nearly drowned after they admitted using marijuana and failed to properly supervise him during a Super Bowl party earlier this year. That child later drew national attention after he was mistakenly declared dead before being found alive hours later in a hospital morgue. Maricopa County Attorney's Office reviewing the Gilbert Police Department's recommendation that Vincent Fiordolino's parents face felony child abuse charges, according to AZ Family. Charges have not been filed yet. Investigators say Vincent disappeared from his parents' view during the gathering before a guest found him floating face down in the backyard swimming pool. According to a police report obtained by AZ Family, both parents later admitted to smoking marijuana during the party. The report alleges Vincent fell into the pool, and that went unnoticed because both parents were impaired by marijuana and or other mind-altering substances. After he was pulled from the water, first responders transported him to the Mercy Gilbert Medical Center, where a doctor pronounced him dead that evening, according to police. The case took an extraordinary turn. Hours later, medical personnel discovered the toddler was alive and breathing after he'd allegedly been transferred to the hospital's morgue about 7:23 in the evening. He was immediately airlifted to Phoenix Children's Hospital for treatment. The police report alleges responding officers and Vincent's parents questioned whether the toddler had actually died before he was pronounced dead, saying they believed he was still showing signs of life. Hospital staff reportedly told him Vincent was exhibiting agonal breathing or involuntary reflex that can occur near death. Well, whatever anybody may have thought, he was most definitely still alive. Well, Chuck Schumer's at it again, and he has a beef with beef. Doesn't even know how to grill it. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer has never worked on a cattle ranch, never run a meat packing plant. Now, after America saw his backyard grilling stunt, it's fair to ask whether he knows how to properly grill a cheeseburger. And as Americans prepare to celebrate the 250th anniversary of our nation's independence on the 4th of July in the heat of the summer grilling season, Schumer wants Washington to get involved in the U.S. beef industry. I mean, let's face it, what could possibly go wrong with that? Schumer's so-called Family Grocer and Farmer Relief Act is a classic Washington liberalism move. Find a problem, misdiagnose the cause, prescribe a cure that makes things worse, and call it relief. We've seen this in healthcare, energy, and housing and education. Politicians create or worsen a crisis, blame private enterprise, and use that pain as an excuse to expand government control. And anything that comes out of shut 'em down Schumer, you do have to question. Well, beef prices are high. Families feel it every time they go to the grocery store. But the cause is not a cartoon conspiracy by meat packers. It's basic economics, strong demand, and tight supply. But leave it to somebody like Schumer to find a made-up excuse. Well, Michigan Democrat Mallory McMorrow drops out of the Senate race weeks before the primary. She announced Sunday she's suspending her campaign for the U.S. Senate in Michigan. Michigan State Senator's decision leaves her party's primary as a two-way race between moderate Representative Haley Stevens, who's backed by longtime Senate Democratic leader Senator Chuck Shut-'em-Down Schumer, and the establishment, and from Wayne County Health Department Director Abdul El Sayed, a left-wing candidate endorsed by progressive champions Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont and Representative ALC of New York. McMorrow's name will reign on the ballot for the August 4th primaries. Ballots have already been printed and distributed to absentee voters, according to Bridge, Michigan. The eventual Democratic nominee will face off in the midterm elections with former Republican Representative Mike Rogers, who's on a glide path to the GOP nomination. This is a crucial race to succeed retiring Senator Gary Peters, a Democrat. We'll see what comes of this particular standoff. Well, England stuns Mexico 3-2 in an instant World Cup classic. Has the team the first World Cup loss in Estadio Azteca. Well, the tournament's instant classics unfolded Sunday at the historic Estadio Azteca. 87,500 screaming fans created a deafening atmosphere. Well, England weathered that storm, silencing the sea of green with a ruthless finishing display to escape with a dramatic 3-2 victory. Jude Bellingham and Harry Kane combined to crush El Tris World Cup dreams. El Tris is a popular nickname for the Mexican men's national team. In a stunning 2-minute span in the first half, Bellingham struck twice, leaving Mexico's defense completely shell-shocked. For halftime, Julian Quinones gave El Tri a lifeline, buried a clutch goal, trimming the deficit to 2-1. The second half was as electric as the first. In the 53rd minute, England went down to 10 men after Jarrell Quansah was shown a straight red card. Suddenly, the momentum appeared to swing in Mexico's favor. But it was not to be. Well, we've been talking about a lot of topics in the various shows we've done. We've been talking about some very odd conspiracy theories. And as you delve into some of the strange things this government's gotten up to, it absolutely boggles the mind at how the imagination of some people has resulted in some very bizarre happenings. I came across something, and I was commissioned as an officer in the United States Army about 2 weeks after the official end of the Vietnam War. In fact, when I got commissioned, I had orders to Vietnam in my pocket. But instead, I was sent to another jungle region. And as you delve into some of the things our government did in the name of national security. It just absolutely leaves you wondering, are the inmates running the asylum? Now, we've talked about some odd off-the-wall operations, but this one took the cake. It's called Operation Wandering Soul. Turns out we were actually fighting a ghost war in Vietnam. Now, the way Operation Wandering Soul operated showed true imagination. It took place at night in the Vietnam jungle. Of course, in the jungle, if you've never been there, the canopy is so thick and there are no streetlights that when darkness falls, you are in true darkness. Somebody can be standing 2 feet away and you won't see them. No streetlights, no houses, no hum of the city, just blackness and the sound of insects, which sometimes gets so loud it sounds like a heartbeat. Well, the way this was envisioned, a group of Viet Cong soldiers would move silently through the jungle. Now, in the jungle, under that canopy, the air is heavy. Humidity clings to the skin. During a night operation, when it was over, you'd be soaking wet sometimes. And of course, pushing through that jungle at night, everybody's exhausted, sleep deprived. And then as they move along, now this is what actually happened, folks, under Operation Wandering Soul. A sound is heard. It's a voice, but not what you'd call a living voice. There'll be a wailing, echoing, disembodied voices that seem to literally float through the trees. And what is heard in these voices, speaking in the language of the Viet Cong, that say, "My brothers, I'm dead. I can't find peace. Leave this place. Go home while you can." Now, say what you will, a lot of the Viet Cong, in fact, a lot of people in Southeast Asia in general, we would call them superstitious. But those that heard this wailing voice would actually freeze, because each one thought they recognized the voice as somebody they knew who was now dead. Somebody who shouldn't be speaking anymore. Some soldiers dropped their rifles, turned and ran. Others started crying. And then a whisper be heard, "The wandering souls." Well, of course, the only thing faster than bullets is the speed in which fear spreads. Well, during the Vietnam War, the U.S. military discovered something vital about Vietnamese cultural belief. Vietnamese spiritual tradition, if a person dies far from home and their body's not buried properly, they become a lost, tormented soul, referred to as a wandering soul. And these spirits are believed to wander the earth, crying out in anguish, unable to find any peace. And certainly they're feared by the living. They're mourned. They're respected. So when one tells you to run, most people run. Well, there was something in the military called the U.S. Psychological Operations Group. And it was their job to come up with methods of, I guess you could say, disarming the enemy, preying on their superstitions. If they could make the enemy believe the dead were calling out to them, begging them to leave, it was believed this would fracture morale without a shot being fired. So they created a campaign that was called Operation Wandering Soul, a full-scale ghost warfare strategy. PSYOPs units recorded audio of voices crying and pleading and warning living soldiers. And these recordings were crafted with precision. They used Vietnamese language, cultural references, and a lot of spiritual symbolism. The audio included wailing cries of anguish, children calling for their fathers, dead soldiers begging the living to go home, echoes layered with eerie reverb to mimic supernatural presence. And these recordings were deployed in the field. Some came from helicopters flying low over jungle terrain at night. Others came from hidden speakers buried in the jungle foliage. Others came from backpack sound systems carried by soldiers. I guess you'd call them paranormal boomboxes. Now, the goal wasn't to trick the senses. It was a weaponized belief. And it worked. Oh, my goodness, it worked. To the Viet Cong, death wasn't just physical. It was spiritual. And if you could hear the voices of the dead, it meant a warning from the afterlife, a curse on the living, and a reminder your soul may never find rest. It wasn't random psychological warfare. It was targeted, cultural-informed fear engineering, for lack of a better term. U.S. military just didn't exploit fear. They exploited ancestral trauma. They turned folklore into a battlefield. And in the dark, that battlefield was impossible to escape. Now, Operation Wandering Soul wasn't a rumor or a myth. It's confirmed, archived, and accessible. U.S. Army Psychological Operations Archives has records. Wandering Souls actually documented as a legitimate operation undertaken by the U.S. Army. In the Vietnam War audio files in the National Archives, you can find records. The original ghost recordings are preserved and publicly accessible. There's actually a field manual called PSYOP in Vietnam. It goes into some detail about the Operation Wandering Soul. There are explicit references to spiritual fear tactics used in combat. You can also find records at the Defense Technical Information Center, or DTIC as it was called. And some mission logs detailed audio broadcast operations and psychological objectives. You can actually listen to these recordings today. And they're as disturbing today as they were then. So now the question becomes, did the expenditure of time, effort, and money in creating this program actually work? And at first, the answer was yes. Soldiers abandoned their posts, jungle patrols broke down, morale cracked in the dark. But the Viet Cong weren't stupid. They realized it was a tactic. And at that point, the effect weakened. North Vietnamese adapted, trained themselves to resist, but the psychological damage lingered. Psychological warfare isn't about convincing everybody. It's about creating doubt. And doubt spreads like smoke. It lingers in the shadows. It whispers even after the speakers go silent. Well, now the very idea of the U.S. Army pretending to be ghosts is bizarre to say the least. But it did take place. In early field operations, it was highly effective. On a scale of 1 to 10, it was about a 7. But once word spread that it was made up, so to speak, the effect became less impactful. Now, from Operation Wandering Soul, something became very clear. And we find something crucial about how power works. Not all control is physical. Not all warfare uses weapons. Sometimes the battlefield is belief. When fear is cultural, ancestral, and spiritual, you don't need to fire a single shot. You just need a voice in the dark. Operation Wandering Soul wasn't just psychological warfare. It was emotional sabotage, spiritual manipulation. Reminder that the most powerful weapon isn't a bomb or a bullet. It's understanding what people actually fear. Because once you understand fear, you can rewrite reality. And that's the reason to move forward. Some of the things that were come up with by the psychological folks absolutely boggle the mind. Takes a very strange personality to come up with an idea like this. And from my time in the military, I can tell you we had some very strange people. Well, one of the things that we had going is conspiracy theories can become weapons if you know how to target it. Now, I've been doing the research for this show. I discovered something else bizarre. Where the term conspiracy theory came from. It actually came from 1967. Country still reeling from the assassination of President Kennedy. And millions of Americans are asking questions, pointing out contradictions, and dissecting witness statements and trying to make sense of an official investigation. The Warren Commission actually still feels incomplete to this day. It was a criminal investigation by committee. In diners and barbershops and living rooms across the country. People were researching everything they could to try to get to the bottom of it. And a new phrase started popping up on TV, in newspaper editorials and interviews. And that new phrase was conspiracy theory. Suddenly asking questions wasn't seen as thoughtful discourse anymore. It was styled as irrational, fringe, literally embarrassing. Now, after the Kennedy assassination, a lot of Americans questioned the Warren Commission. That was the government-appointed group tasked with explaining what had happened. And some believed the evidence was incomplete or that certain details didn't add up. I mean, you have to ask yourself, what did we learn from looking at Lee Harvey Oswald's elementary school report cards? And this attitude created a problem for government officials who wanted to reestablish public trust and prevent widespread skepticism. So in 1967, the CIA issued a document known as Dispatch 1035-960. And this copy was sent to all field offices. And the purpose of this document was to suggest strategies for how to respond to people criticizing government narratives. That was not patriotic, you know. One of these strategies was promote the phrase conspiracy theory as a way to discredit critics. Don't debate them. Don't present evidence. Shape how the public perceives the critics. Now, you may say that in and of itself is a conspiracy theory, but actually there's evidence that this actually took place. The document itself, CIA Dispatch 1035-960, is available through Freedom of Information Act request. And the purpose of that document was to influence the media and the opinion against critics of the Warren Commission. And the strategy that was suggested encouraged the media to describe alternative explanations as just conspiracy theory. Now, the term, of course, existed previously, but usage increased significantly after 1967, when it was used to actually ridicule anybody who didn't believe the government's position. Now, the CIA didn't invent the phrase, but they did explicitly encourage using it as a tool to legitimize, dissent. It's about framing, not about fabrication. They didn't make anything up. They just held it up to ridicule. Now, for decades, the idea that the government would shape language to influence public opinion sounded like something out of a spy novel. Because after all, most people trusted TV anchors. If Walter Cronkite had run for president, he'd have won in a landslide. Textbooks, that was the gospel. Official reports, the experts. And it's uncomfortable to imagine that public perception can be steered with just a label. But under this program, calling something a conspiracy theory became a conversation ender, a social pressure tool, a way to avoid evaluating evidence at all. That phrase became a shortcut for that person not to be taken seriously. Now, the document wasn't publicly known until the 70s, when investigative journalists and congressional committees pushed for greater transparency. And after a number of lawsuits and FOIA requests, that dispatch was released to the public. Anybody could read it. It wasn't a rumor anymore, it wasn't speculation. It was printed and archived and referenced and scanned into federal public records. The strategy was real. The framing was intentional. Truth didn't matter anymore. That's how things were perceived. Now, we're not saying any specific conspiracy theory is true. But what we are showing is something much more important. That under this move by our government, questioning power is intentionally stigmatized. The phrase conspiracy theory tells us less about the claim being made, more about the power dynamic behind the discussion. Sometimes the way something is framed matters a lot more than the facts themselves. Now, one program we've talked about several times is something called Operation Northwoods, which was formalized in a high-level Pentagon meeting in 1962. Now, for those that don't remember what Operation Northwoods is, it was a proposal to stage fake terrorist attacks on American soil, blow up civilian airplanes, create fake funerals, use real grieving families, and blame it all on Cuba, and use the emotional reaction to gain public support for a war. By and large, the American people are not pro-war, in spite of what we're told. But you get somebody's emotions up, you can definitely use that to create a wartime footing. And Operation Northwoods was the basis for which the federal government decided to remove Fidel Castro from power in Cuba. Now, unfortunately for the men in uniform, the American public did not want a war with anybody. We already had Vietnam going on. So it was, again, from the PSYOP folks, U.S. military leadership needed a strategy. So it was decided by some of the same folks that brought us Operation Wandering Soul. We needed to make the public want a war. By manufacturing events that would trigger fear and outrage and emotional unity. It was thought that staging fake Cuban attacks on U.S. citizens would make Cuba look aggressive. Sinking U.S. ships and blaming Cuba would create shock and demand retaliation. Orchestrating a fake airplane hijacking could be used to blame Castro for terrorism. Planting bombs in public places would increase fear and emotional urgency. And creating fake lists of casualties to be released through the media would make it personal and patriotic to go to war. The strategy behind Operation Northwoods was don't wait for a reason to go to war, just create one. Now, for those who say, oh, that's just speculation, nobody'd come up with that. The original documents are declassified and publicly available. One memorandum is actually entitled Operation Northwoods, dated March 13, 1962, and it was approved by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, later declassified and released under the JFK Records Act. If you need additional confirmation, the National Security Archive at George Washington University has a copy. U.S. Department of Defense declassified files contain copies. And Senate committee hearings in the 1990s, you can find copies in the JFK Archives releases. Now, the detail that most people miss in regard to Operation Northwoods, the plan was approved by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the highest-ranking military decision-makers in this country. The only reason it didn't move forward was President Kennedy put a stop to it. Now, what does this mean? It means the plan was real. The intent was real. The capability was real. The only barrier to carrying out Operation Northwoods was a single person in the office of the president. If Lyndon I'm going to be King Johnson had been president, we'd have probably have done it. Now, for decades, the idea the U.S. military would harm its own citizens was literally unthinkable. People said things like, they'd never do that. But this is a common misunderstanding. Governments don't need to hurt anybody. They just need to influence the story people believe. If Walter Cronkite had gone on TV at the height of his fame and said, we're being invaded by men from Mars, it would have been War of the Worlds all over again. People riding around the countryside in pickup trucks with shotguns and waiting to shoot those Martians. Events that trigger strong emotional reactions can shift national opinion instantly. Fear changes what people are willing to accept. This is not about patriotism by any means. It's about strategy. Now, Operation Northwood stayed classified until the JFK Assassination Records Review Board ordered the release of decades-old documents in the 1990s. And once these documents were released, journalists analyzed it, historians confirmed it, and became part of the U.S. public record. It wasn't just a rumor anymore. It wasn't just an accusation. It was a documented history. Operation Northwoods doesn't prove every conspiracy theory is true. It proves something much more simpler than that. Governments sometimes consider extreme actions to create public support for policies the public doesn't want. This doesn't mean everything is fake, but it does mean sometimes outrage is engineered. Sometimes the story actually comes before the event. Now, as we talk about not only this show, but future shows, I want you to keep something in mind. Not everything that happens is a conspiracy. Sometimes the official narrative is a strategy, not a report. And just like Operation Wandering Soul, just because something sounds outrageous does not mean it's not real. Now, most of us have never been involved in a cult. But it turns out some of the wealthiest people in this country have taken part in something that can be referred to as cult-like. I'm talking about Bohemian Grove. Now, deep in the California redwoods is a property with gates higher than a prison fence and a guard list longer than the Oscars guest roll. Every summer, 2,000 of the most powerful men in the world vanish into these trees. There are no journalists and no phones, no transparency, just absolute privacy. And at night, under torchlight, they gather in hooded robes and perform a ceremony that's called the cremation of care. They burn a symbolic human figure in front of a 40-foot stone owl while chanting. It's called a theatrical tradition. But actually, it's something more primal. It's bonding through secrecy. Because after that little ritual takes place, the real conversation begins. The kind that changed the world. The Bohemian Grove is a 133-year-old elite retreat in Monte Rio, California. Started out as a camp for artists, but it evolved into presidents and generals and media owners and bank executives and intelligence chiefs, people who control money, information, law, and war, getting together. They drink, they network, and they plan. Deals that shape global policy are made without any voters, cameras, or accountability. They are all powerful. Now, known attendees, understand, this is not rumor. This is documented. Among the attendees, Ronald Reagan, Richard Nixon, Bill Clinton, in his pre-presidency political grooming era, George H.W. Bush, Henry Kissinger, the Koch brothers, executives from Boeing and Lockheed and Goldman Sachs and Fox and CBS and Google. This is not random folks on a camping trip by any means. It's the ruling class annual convention. It happens behind trees, not podiums. Among the proof, journalist Alex Sumatov infiltrated it, wrote a book about it, and wrote stories about it in Vanity Fair. Alex Jones in 1999 actually got documentary footage, confirmed the ritual. Historian G. William Dumhoff analyzed Grove membership records. Richard Nixon was heard talking about it on White House tapes. He said, Bohemian Grove is the most goddamn faggy thing you could ever imagine. He didn't deny the Grove took place. He acknowledged it and didn't like the vibe, but he still went. He had to. Because power is there, and if you want power, you have to show up. And the real conspiracy isn't the owl. The real conspiracy is powerful people meet in private to make decisions that affect the public without the public knowing anything about it. There are no elections, no notes, no accountability. Just handshake agreements that end up becoming wars and economic restructuring and policy shifts and global cooperation. Oh, coercion. It isn't a cult. It's real politic. Bohemian Grove isn't about robes or rituals. It's more about relationships. Presidents and media moguls and defense contractors and intelligence chiefs don't gather in the woods to roast marshmallows. They gather to align interests quietly, privately, without oversight. No elections, no cameras, no accountability. But what happens there shapes what happens every place else. Bohemian Grove teaches you one lesson. The world isn't run by the loudest voices. It's run by the quietest rooms. And sometimes those rooms happen to be deep in the forest. Well, I want to leave you with one more thing that was called a conspiracy theory. It turned out to be proved. The Tuskegee syphilis study. Trust was turned into a weapon. Imagine you're sick. You go to the doctor. They promise to help you. They look you in the eye and say, we're treating you. But instead, they're just wanting to study how you die. The strange thing is these were some of the most trusted doctors around. And this happened to black men in Alabama for 40 years. Think about that, 40 years. Not 4 months, not 4 years, 40 years. From 1932 to 1972, the U.S. Public Health Service ran a study to observe the long-term effects of untreated syphilis in black men. Now, one key fact, they weren't told they had syphilis. Instead, they were told they had bad blood, promised free medical care, given placebos instead of treatment, denied penicillin even when it became the cure in the 1940s. Some of the black men went blind. Some went insane. Some died. Their wives were infected and children were born with syphilis. This wasn't a mistake by any means. It was a strategy. This was all done in the name of research. And if you want the evidence, the official Department of Health documentation lays it out. Survivor testimony, 1973 congressional hearings, a 1997 U.S. government formal apology from President Clinton. There's no debate about whether it happened. The U.S. government admitted it. Now, you may ask why that old history matters. Because when black Americans today say, I don't trust medical institutions, that's not a conspiracy theory. That's not paranoia. That's not a misunderstanding. It's actually generational memory passed down from grandfathers who were lied to, grandmothers who were infected, and children born into pain that could have been prevented. This Tuskegee study didn't just break bodies, it broke trust, a trust that hadn't been fully restored yet. So when people hesitate to take a vaccine, question a diagnosis, or avoid a hospital altogether, here's why. On that note, we come to the end of today's show. We'll be back tomorrow and talk about more conspiracies. Until then, Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show saying, don't believe everything you're told. And if somebody's accused of being a believer in conspiracy theories, you're parroting what the CIA wants you to say. So until tomorrow, Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show saying have a truly great evening.